The bitter wind howled with relentless fury as Katherine Turner stared in disbelief at the disappearing wagon train, her hopes vanishing with each fading creak of wheels against the snow-covered trail. It was December 1867, and the Oregon-bound caravan had left her behind in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Colorado Territory, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of possessions. Katherine's breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air as she hugged herself tightly, trembling not only from the biting cold, but from the horrifying realization that she had been abandoned. The wagon master had given the order to move on after their brief midday stop, not realizing or perhaps not caring that she had wandered into the nearby woods to gather kindling. By the time she'd returned, they were gone, their tracks already being covered by the intensifying snowfall. "No," she whispered, the word lost in the howling wind. "Please, no." She had left everything behind in St. Louis, her teaching position, her small room at the boarding house, and the few friends she'd made, all to join her cousin's family on their journey west. Without them, she was utterly alone, with no shelter and no hope of surviving the night in the worsening blizzard. Katherine stumbled forward, following the trail as best she could, though the falling snow was rapidly obscuring any sign of the wagon's passage. Her thin woolen coat offered little protection against the elements, and her boots, while sturdy, were not designed for trekking through snow drifts that now reached her knees in places. "Help!" she called out, though she knew it was futile. The wind carried her voice away, swallowing her cries as effectively as the snow was consuming the trail. "Please, someone help me!" The daylight was already fading, the short winter day giving way to what promised to be a long, deadly night. Katherine knew enough about frontier life to understand that without shelter, without fire, she wouldn't survive until morning. Desperation drove her forward even as exhaustion and cold threatened to pull her down. Just as the last threads of her courage were unraveling, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. At first, she thought it was her mind playing cruel tricks, conjuring the sound she most wanted to hear. But then the rhythm grew louder, more distinct, cutting through the wind's mournful cry. Katherine turned, her numb face stinging as fresh tears froze on her cheeks. Through the curtain of snow appeared a lone rider, tall in the saddle, pushing his horse through the drifts with determined speed. His face was obscured by a thick scarf and the brim of his hat, but there was no mistaking his purpose as he rode directly toward her. The horse, a powerful chestnut stallion, snorted clouds of steam as the rider pulled up beside her. Strong hands reached down, and a pair of intense blue eyes met hers from beneath the shadow of his hat. "Miss Turner." The man's voice was deep and rich, though strained with urgency. "Thank God I found you." Katherine stared up at him in confusion. It took her frozen mind a moment to place him Adam Xavier, one of the scouts who had been guiding the wagon train. She had spoken to him only a few times during their journey, always briefly, always proper. "Mr. Xavier," she managed through chattering teeth. "They left. They're gone." "I know," he said grimly, dismounting in one fluid motion. "The wagon master didn't realize until the count at the evening stop. I came back as soon as I heard." He shrugged out of his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, the residual warmth from his body feeling like a miracle against her frozen skin. "We need to find shelter, and fast," he said, his eyes scanning the darkening landscape. "This storm's getting worse." "The wagon train," Katherine said weakly. "Can we catch up?" Adam shook his head. "They've gone too far ahead, and it's not safe to travel through the night in this weather. We'll find somewhere to wait out the storm." His voice softened as he looked down at her. "I won't leave you, Miss Turner." "Not again." There was something in the way he said those words that reached through Catherine's fear and desperation. A promise, steadfast and true. For the first time since seeing the wagons disappear, she felt a flicker of hope. Adam lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His strong arms encircled her as he took the reins, and despite their dire situation, Katherine felt an unexpected sense of security as she leaned back against his solid chest. "There's an old trapper's cabin about a mile east of here," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "If we're lucky, it's still standing. Hold on tight, Miss Turner." As they rode through the deepening snow, Katherine found herself clinging to both the horse and the man behind her. Adam Xavier had come back for her when everyone else had gone. Whatever happened next, she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin Adam had mentioned was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn logs with a partially collapsed roof, but it was enough to block the punishing wind. Adam helped Katherine inside, then quickly returned to tend to his horse, securing the animal in the lean-to attached to the cabin's eastern wall. Katherine stood in the center of the small space, still wrapped in Adam's coat, surveying her surroundings in the fading light. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was a crude pallet in one corner. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, but the floor was dry, and the walls, though showing gaps between some logs, would shelter them from the worst of the elements. Adam returned, carrying his saddlebags and a bundle of firewood he'd found stacked in the lean-to. "Looks like whoever used this place last left us a bit of kindling," he said, kneeling at the fireplace. "Let's hope the chimney's clear enough to draw." Katherine watched as his practiced hands arranged the wood and struck a match. The flame caught, and soon a small fire was crackling, casting dancing shadows around the cabin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming back for me." Adam looked up, the firelight illuminating his face. Without his hat, she could see him clearly for the first time, strong jawline covered in stubble, those striking blue eyes, and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps 30 to her 22 years. "No need for thanks," he replied. "I couldn't leave you out there to die. No decent man could. But you were the only one who came back," Katherine pointed out. "The wagon master, Dixon's main concern is getting those families to Oregon before spring." Adam's voice held a note of bitterness. "Once I convinced him you were missing, he sent me to find you, but the train couldn't wait. They'll push on to the next proper settlement and wait for us there." "Where is that?" Katherine asked, slowly moving closer to the fire, drawn by its life-giving warmth. "Santa Fe, New Mexico territory. It's about 3 days' ride from here in good weather." He glanced toward the small window, where snow continued to fall heavily. "In this, could be a week or more." The reality of their situation sank in. A week alone in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew. Katherine had been raised with strict propriety, and despite their desperate circumstances, she felt a flutter of anxiety at the impropriety of it all. As if reading her thoughts, Adam cleared his throat. "I'll sleep by the fire, Miss Turner. You can take the pallet." "It's not much, but it'll be warmer than the floor," Katherine nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Please call me Katherine. It seems silly to stand on formality when you've saved my life." A small smile crossed his face, softening his rugged features. "Katherine, then, and I'm Adam." They fell into an awkward silence as Adam busied himself unpacking his saddlebags. He produced some jerky and hardtack, along with a canteen of water. "It's not much of a supper, but it'll keep us going until morning." Katherine accepted her portion gratefully. As they ate their meager meal, she found herself studying Adam surreptitiously. He'd been with the wagon train since they'd left Independence, Missouri, but had kept mostly to himself, riding ahead to scout or dropping back to ensure, no one straggled too far behind. She'd noticed him. Of course it was hard not to notice such a commanding presence, but they'd exchanged only a few words here and there. "How did you become a scout?" she asked, breaking the silence. Adam looked up, seeming surprised by her question. "I rode with the Pony Express for a few years, then served as a Union scout during the war. Afterward, guiding wagon trains west seemed a natural fit." "You know this country well, then," he nodded. "Well enough to know we're lucky to have found this cabin, this storm." He glanced toward the window again. "It's a bad one." As if to emphasize his point, the wind howled fiercely, finding every gap in the cabin's walls and sending drafts of icy air swirling around them. Katherine shivered despite the fire in Adam's coat. "Here," Adam said, reaching into his saddlebag once more and producing a wool blanket. "Wrap this around you too." "What about you?" Katherine asked, even as she gratefully accepted the blanket. "I'm used to the cold," he said simply, though she noticed him inching closer to the fire. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll see what the storm has left us." Katherine made her way to the pallet in the corner, keeping Adam's coat and the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as the wind continued its assault on their shelter, and the reality of her situation kept intruding on her thoughts. She had been so certain about joining the wagon train, so eager to leave behind the emptiness of her life in St. Louis. After losing her parents to influenza 3 years earlier, she had been existing rather than living, teaching at the small school and returning each evening to her lonely room. When her cousin Martha had written, inviting her to join them on their journey to Oregon, it had seemed like Providence a chance for a new beginning. Now, here she was, separated from the train, alone with a virtual stranger in a dilapidated cabin while a blizzard raged outside. What would happen if they reached Santa Fe? Would the wagon train still be there, waiting? And what if they couldn't make it at all? Across the cabin, Adam added another log to the fire, his movements careful and quiet. Despite the impropriety of their situation, Katherine found herself oddly comforted by his presence. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that reassured her more than words could. As the fire's warmth finally penetrated her chilled body, Katherine's eyelids grew heavy. Her last conscious thought before drifting into sleep was of Adam's words, "I won't leave you, not again." Morning arrived with an eerie silence. The howling wind had died, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Katherine awoke to find Adam already up, tending to a small fire in the fireplace and heating what appeared to be coffee in a battered tin pot. "You're awake," he said, noticing her stirring. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, sitting up and combing her fingers through her tangled auburn hair. She felt stiff and was still wearing her dress from yesterday, now wrinkled and travel-worn, but she was alive, and for that, she was immensely grateful. "The storm's passed, but we've got at least 3 feet of fresh snow out there," Adam reported, pouring steaming coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. "It'll be slow going, but I think we should try to make some progress today. The weather might turn again and our supplies are limited." Katherine accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "How far do you think we can get?" "There's a small settlement about 15 miles southwest of here, little more than a trading post and a few cabins, but they'll have supplies and proper shelter." Adam poured a cup for himself and sat down near the fire. "If we can make it there, we can rest a day or two, then push on to Santa Fe when the trails are more passable." The thought of traveling through such deep snow was daunting, but Katherine knew they had little choice. She sipped her coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "I'm ready whenever you are." Adam regarded her with something like admiration in his eyes, Most city women would be falling apart right now. I'm not most women, Katherine replied, a touch of defiance in her voice. And I stopped being a city woman the day I joined that wagon train. A small smile touched Adam's lips. So I see. They ate a sparse breakfast of jerky and the last of the hardtack, then prepared to leave. Adam gave Katherine his spare wool socks to layer over her own, and fashioned crude gaiters from pieces of an old blanket he found in the cabin to keep snow from filling her boots. "Keep my coat," he insisted when she tried to return it. "I've got my buckskin jacket and you need the warmth more than I do." Outside, the world was a blinding expanse of white under a crystal-clear blue sky. Adam's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, snorted and stamped as Adam saddled him. "We'll both ride," Adam explained. "The snow's too deep for you to walk, and Rusty's strong enough to carry us both, at least for today." He helped Katherine mount, then swung up behind her. The closeness was even more apparent in the daylight, and Katherine felt a blush creeping into her cheeks at the feel of Adam's solid chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. As they set off, the horse plowing determinedly through the deep snow, Katherine found herself acutely aware of every point of contact between her body and Adam's. It was improper, scandalous even, yet their circumstances made such concerns seem trivial. She was alive because of this man's courage and determination. If that meant enduring a few days of impropriety, so be it. The journey was slow and arduous. Rusty struggled through drifts that sometimes reached his chest, and Adam frequently had to dismount to lead the horse through particularly treacherous patches. By midday, they had covered perhaps 5 miles, and both humans and horse were exhausted. They stopped in a small clearing to rest, Adam sharing the last of his water and another strip of jerky with Katherine. As they sat on a fallen log that Adam had cleared of snow, Katherine found herself studying his profile as he scanned the horizon. "Why did you become a scout?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "It seems a lonely profession." Adam was quiet for a long moment before answering. "After the war, I couldn't settle back into normal life. Too many memories, too many ghosts." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes solemn. "Out here in open country, those ghosts don't follow so closely," Katherine nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. "I know something about ghosts. After my parents died, St. Louis became unbearable. Every street, every building held memories." "Is that why you joined the wagon train?" "To escape, partly," she admitted, "but also to find something new, a purpose perhaps. My cousin Martha has 3 small children, she needs help and I need to be needed." Adam studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "You're brave, Katherine Turner." "Braver than many men I've known." His words warmed her more than any fire could have. Before she could respond, however, Rusty nickered softly, drawing Adam's attention. "We should move on," he said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "There's still a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." The afternoon brought new challenges as the terrain became more rugged. They entered a region of rolling hills, each ascent demanding extra effort from Rusty, each descent requiring careful navigation to avoid hidden dangers beneath the snow. As the short winter day began to wane, Katherine could feel Adam's increasing tension. They had covered perhaps 12 miles, still 3 miles short of the settlement he'd mentioned, and the temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting sun. "We need to find shelter soon," Adam said, his voice tight with concern. "The night will be bitter cold." Just as despair began to creep into Katherine's thoughts, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. The settlement was still too far to reach before dark, but the smoke meant habitation of some kind. "There," Adam said, relief evident in his voice. "Someone's living in these hills. With luck, they'll offer us shelter for the night." They urged Rusty toward the smoke, following a half-buried trail that wound through a stand of pine trees. As they emerged from the trees, they saw a small cabin nestled against the hillside, its windows glowing with warm light. Adam approached cautiously, helping Katherine dismount before walking to the cabin door. His hand rested instinctively on the revolver at his hip as he knocked firmly. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a snow-white beard and wary eyes. He held a shotgun loosely in his hands, not quite pointed at them, but ready. "What's your business?" he demanded, his voice rough with age and suspicion. "Just travelers seeking shelter from the cold," Adam replied evenly. "The lady and I were separated from our wagon train in the storm. We're trying to reach Miller's trading post, but we won't make it before dark." The old man's gaze shifted to Katherine, and his expression softened slightly. "Woman shouldn't be out in this weather," he muttered. After a moment's consideration, he stepped back, lowering his shotgun. "Come in, then. Got a warm fire and some stew on the pot. Not much room, but it's better than freezing to death out there." "Thank you, sir," Katherine said gratefully as she and Adam entered the small cabin. "Name's Jeremiah Hayes," the old man said, setting his shotgun aside. "Been trapping these hills for 30 years now." "Adam Xavier," Adam replied, extending his hand. "And this is Miss Katherine Turner." The cabin was small but tidy, with a blazing fire in the stone fireplace and furs covering the walls and floor. A pot of something savory smelling bubbled over the fire, and the warmth of the room was a welcome relief after hours in the cold. "Your horse can go in the lean-to with my mule," Jeremiah offered. "Got some hay and grain to spare." While Adam tended to Rusty, Jeremiah gestured for Katherine to sit on a bench near the fire. "Been a long while since I had a lady visitor," he said, his voice gentler than before. "Forgive the humble accommodations. After nearly freezing to death in a blizzard, your cabin feels like a palace," Katherine assured him with a smile. Jeremiah chuckled, then moved to stir the pot over the fire. "Rabbit stew. Not fancy, but it's hot and filling." When Adam returned, they shared a meal that tasted better than any fancy restaurant fare Katherine could remember. Perhaps it was their near brush with disaster, or simply the genuine hospitality of their host, but the simple stew and cornbread seemed like a feast fit for royalty. As they ate, Jeremiah shared news of the region, the increasing traffic on the Santa Fe Trail, rumors of new silver strikes in the mountains to the west, and the growing tension between settlers and the native tribes whose land was being encroached upon. "You folks headed all the way to Oregon?" he asked, refilling their tin cups with strong black coffee. "That was the plan," Katherine replied. "My cousin and her family are part of the Wagon train. We're hoping to catch up with them in Santa Fe." Jeremiah nodded thoughtfully. "Santa Fe's a good place to winter if you have to. Train probably won't move on until spring anyway. Pass up north gets mighty treacherous this time of year." Adam leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What about the trail from here to Santa Fe? How bad is it after this snow?" "Won't be easy," Jeremiah admitted. "But if you follow the valley instead of the high trail, you'll avoid the worst drifts. Take you an extra day, maybe 2, but safer by far." As the evening wore on, Katherine found her eyelids growing heavy. Jeremiah noticed and quickly made arrangements for sleeping. He insisted that Katherine take his narrow bed, while he and Adam would sleep on pallets near the fire. "Been sleeping on the floor half my life anyway," the old trapper said with a wink. "Won't bother me none." Despite her protests that she didn't want to displace him from his bed, Jeremiah was adamant. Eventually, Katherine relented, too exhausted to argue further. As she settled under the warm furs, the low murmur of the men's voices by the fire created a soothing backdrop. She found herself watching Adam's profile in the firelight as he and Jeremiah pored over a rough map the old man had sketched, planning tomorrow's journey. There was something captivating about his focused expression, the way he listened intently to the trapper's advice, asking occasional questions that revealed his practical knowledge of wilderness survival. In the short time since he'd found her in the snow, Adam Xavier had become more than just her rescuer. He had become her lifeline to survival, to hope. Katherine realized with a start that she was beginning to care for him in ways that went beyond mere gratitude. The thought should have alarmed her proper sensibilities, but instead it brought a strange comfort as she drifted into sleep. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she wasn't facing it alone. Morning came with renewed purpose. After a hearty breakfast of sourdough biscuits and dried venison, Jeremiah provided them with supplies for their journey: jerky, pemmican, coffee, and a small sack of flour. He also insisted on giving Katherine a pair of fur-lined mittens and leggings made from rabbit pelts. "Can't have you freezing before you reach Santa Fe," he said gruffly, waving away her thanks. "Just doing what any Christian would do." When they prepared to leave, the old trapper walked with them to where Rusty waited, already saddled and eager to move. "Follow the valley like I showed you on the map," he reminded Adam. "Miller's trading post is about 8 miles south. From there you can pick up the lower trail to Santa Fe, should reach it in 4 days, weather permitting." Adam clasped the older man's hand warmly. "We're in your debt, Jeremiah. If there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness, just get the lady safely to Santa Fe," Jeremiah replied with a smile that crinkled his weathered face. "And maybe stop by on your way back through, tell me how your journey ended." "We will," Katherine promised as Adam helped her mount. She looked down at the kind old trapper who had sheltered them. "Thank you for everything." As they rode away, Katherine found herself reflecting on the unexpected goodness they had encountered in this harsh wilderness. Jeremiah Hayes, a man who had chosen solitude over civilization, had opened his home and shared his limited supplies with strangers without hesitation. It was a reminder that humanity and compassion could flourish even in the most isolated places. The trail through the valley was easier going than the previous day's journey. The snow was not as deep here, sheltered as it was by the surrounding hills, and Rusty made good progress despite carrying both riders. Adam kept one arm securely around Katherine's waist as they rode, a practical necessity that nonetheless sent a flutter through her each time he adjusted his hold. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories of their lives before the wagon train. Katherine told him about her teaching in St. Louis, the small school where she had taught children ranging from 5 to 15 years of age, all crowded into one room. "I loved the teaching itself," she explained, "but after my parents died, everything in St. Louis felt hollow." When Martha's letter came, inviting me to join them in Oregon, it seemed like Providence. "Do you regret it?" Adam asked. Leaving everything familiar behind, Katherine considered the question seriously. Even now, lost in the wilderness, separated from the train, "No, I don't regret it. At least I'm living now, not just existing." Adam was quiet for a moment before responding. "I understand that distinction all too well." In turn, he shared more about his own past, his childhood on a small farm in Pennsylvania, his years riding for the Pony Express as a young man, and his service during the Civil War. He spoke of the latter with reluctance, clearly carrying burdens from those years that he preferred not to name. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go home," he said, his voice low. "Everything had changed, or maybe I had. Either way, I started moving west and never really stopped." Until now, Katherine said softly. Adam's arm tightened slightly around her waist. Until now, he agreed. By mid-afternoon, they reached Miller's trading post, a collection of sturdy log buildings surrounding a central store and tavern. The arrival of travelers in the dead of winter caused quite a stir among the small community, and they were quickly ushered into the tavern, where a roaring fire and hot food awaited. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man named Elias Miller, listened with interest to their tale of separation from the wagon train. "Heard about that train," he said, stroking his thick mustache. "Passed through about 10 days ago, headed for Santa Fe. If they got caught in that same blizzard, they might still be holed up there, waiting for better weather." The news kindled hope in Katherine's heart. "Do you think we can catch up to them?" Elias glanced out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "Trail to Santa Fe's passable, especially if you take the lower route along the river. 4, maybe 5 days' ride in these conditions." He turned to Adam. "You planning to leave tomorrow?" Adam looked at Katherine, concern evident in his eyes. "You should rest at least a day. The journey so far has been hard on you." Though she was indeed exhausted, Katherine shook her head firmly. "I've rested enough. The sooner we reach Santa Fe, the better our chances of finding the wagon train still there." "The lady's got grit," Elias observed with approval. "You two married?" The question caught them both off guard. Katherine felt heat rising to her cheeks as Adam quickly explained their actual relationship. "Fellow travelers, nothing more." Elias raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. "Well, we've got 2 rooms available upstairs. Hot water for bathing too, if you want it." The mention of a proper bath was enough to make Katherine forget her embarrassment. After days in the same travel-worn clothing, the prospect of cleaning up was irresistible. While Katherine enjoyed the luxury of warm water and privacy, Adam arranged for supplies for the remainder of their journey to Santa Fe. The trading post was well stocked, and though prices were high, as they always were in remote locations, Adam didn't hesitate to purchase everything they might need: food, ammunition, winter gear, and even a second horse, a sturdy bay mare that would allow them to travel faster than if they both continued to ride Rusty. That evening, cleaned and wearing a fresh dress from her bundle of possessions miraculously still intact after their ordeal, Katherine joined Adam and several locals for dinner in the tavern. She was acutely aware of how they must appear to others, an unmarried man and woman traveling alone together, sharing meals and presumably sleeping under the same roof. In any eastern city, such an arrangement would be scandalous. Yet here, in the wilderness of the Colorado Territory, conventional propriety seemed to hold less sway. The locals treated them with respect and hospitality, more concerned with their safety and comfort than with the potential impropriety of their situation. Still, as they sat at a corner table sharing a meal of venison stew and fresh bread, Katherine couldn't help but notice the curious glances cast their way. Adam noticed too, and after they had eaten, he leaned across the table, speaking softly. "People are talking," he said. "Not that I care much for gossip, but you should know that your reputation might suffer if we continue to travel together unchaperoned." Katherine appreciated his concern, but found herself surprisingly unconcerned. "My reputation will hardly matter if I freeze to death in the Colorado wilderness," she pointed out. "Besides, what alternative do we have?" Adam's expression remained serious. "There's a preacher staying here tonight, passing through on his way to a mission near Taos. We could—" He hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. "We could ask him to marry us, just on paper for propriety's sake. Once we reach Santa Fe and find your cousin, we could have it annulled if you wish." The suggestion took Katherine's breath away. Marriage, even one in name only, was not something she had expected him to propose. She studied his face, searching for some hint of his true feelings. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. Adam held her gaze steadily. "What I want is to see you safely to Santa Fe with your good name intact. But I won't deny that I've come to care for you, Katherine, more than I expected to care for anyone again." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep within her. In the few days they had spent together, facing death and hardship, a bond had formed between them that transcended conventional courtship. She knew more about Adam Xavier's character and courage than she might have learned in months of proper social interaction. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted softly. "But marriage, that's a sacred commitment, not something to be entered into lightly, even for practical reasons." Adam nodded, respecting her reservation. "Think about it tonight. Whatever you decide, I'll respect your choice." With that, they parted for the evening, each retiring to their separate rooms above the tavern. Katherine lay awake for hours, her mind turning over Adam's suggestion. Marriage to a man she had known for only days, it was madness by any rational standard. Yet when she thought about continuing their journey to Santa Fe, possibly parting ways once they found the wagon train, a sense of loss swept through her. Adam had become more than her rescuer. He had become someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose presence brought her comfort and strength. Was that enough basis for marriage? Or was she confusing gratitude with deeper feelings? Morning brought clarity with it. When Katherine descended to the tavern's main room, she found Adam already there, nursing a cup of coffee. He rose when he saw her, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you." Katherine took a deep breath. "I've thought about what you said last night, about marriage." Adam nodded, waiting patiently for her to continue. "I don't want a marriage of convenience, or one entered into merely for propriety's sake," she said firmly. "If we were to marry, it would be because we truly wished to build a life together, not because of circumstances or others' opinions." Something like disappointment flickered in Adam's eyes, but he nodded acceptance. "I understand. It was a hasty suggestion, perhaps presumptuous." "You didn't let me finish," Katherine interrupted, a small smile playing at her lips. "I don't want a marriage of convenience, but I find that I do want something more than friendship with you, Adam. These past days have shown me a side of you that I deeply admire and respect. I'm not ready for marriage, not yet, but I'm open to the possibility of a future where that might be our choice, freely made, without pressure or pretense." The tension visibly eased from Adam's shoulders, and a slow smile spread across his face. "That seems eminently reasonable, Miss Turner," he said, the formality belied by the warmth in his voice. "I find myself quite amenable to exploring what that future might hold." Their departure from Miller's trading post later that morning had a different quality to it, a sense of shared purpose that went beyond mere survival. With 2 horses, they made better time, following the lower trail as Elias had suggested, which wound alongside a half-frozen river. The weather remained clear but bitterly cold. They rode for as long as daylight allowed, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses or to eat a quick meal. At night, they camped in sheltered spots, building fires against the cold and taking turns keeping watch. On their 3rd night out from the trading post, as they huddled near their campfire in a small grove of trees, Adam shared more of his past, not the sanitized version he had offered earlier, but the raw truth of his experiences during the war. He spoke of the horrors he had witnessed, the friends he had lost, and the guilt he carried for surviving when so many had not. "There are nights when I still hear the cannons," he admitted, staring into the flames. "Still smell the gunpowder and the blood. Those are the nights I ride out alone, away from the wagon trains I'm guiding, because I can't bear for anyone to see me like that." Katherine moved closer, placing her hand gently on his arm. "You don't have to hide those parts of yourself from me, Adam. We all carry wounds, visible and invisible." He looked at her then, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "You're unlike any woman I've ever known, Katherine Turner." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied with a soft smile. "It was meant as one." Adam hesitated, then slowly raised his hand to brush a strand of auburn hair from her face. "May I kiss you, Katherine?" The question, asked with such careful respect, made her heart flutter. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative exploration of new territory for both of them. When they pulled apart, Katherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, a boundary crossed that could never be redrawn. The remaining days of their journey were marked by a growing intimacy, not physical, for they maintained propriety in that regard, but emotional. They shared stories, dreams, and quiet moments that created a foundation stronger than any Katherine had imagined possible in such a short time. On the afternoon of their 5th day of travel from Miller's trading post, they crested a ridge and saw Santa Fe spread out before them in the valley below. Even from a distance, the adobe buildings glowed warmly in the late afternoon sun, promising sanctuary after their arduous journey. "We made it," Katherine breathed, relief washing through her. Adam reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Together," he said simply. They rode into Santa Fe as the sun was setting, tired but triumphant. The town was busier than Katherine had expected. A blend of Mexican, American, and native influences evident in the architecture, the dress of the people they passed, and the languages that reached their ears. Adam led them directly to the main plaza, where he inquired about the Oregon-bound wagon train. To Katherine's immense relief, they learned that the train was indeed still in Santa Fe, camped at the northern edge of town. The deep snow in the mountain passes had forced them to winter in the settlement, with plans to resume their journey in early spring. As they approached the wagon encampment, Katherine felt a surge of conflicting emotions: joy at the prospect of reuniting with her cousin's family, yet a strange reluctance as well. Her time with Adam had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The camp was alive with activity despite the late hour. Campfires dotted the area, and the familiar shapes of canvas-covered wagons were a welcome sight after so many days of uncertainty. A shout went up as they were recognized, and suddenly they were surrounded by members of the wagon train, faces alight with astonishment and relief. Martha pushed through the crowd, her 3 children clustered behind her. "Katherine!" she cried, rushing forward to embrace her cousin. "Oh, thank God, we thought you were dead," Katherine returned the embrace, tears springing to her eyes. "I nearly was," she said, "if not for Adam." Martha turned to Adam, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully to one side. "Mr. Xavier, we owe you a debt that can never be repaid. When the wagon master told us you'd gone back alone." "It was the only decent thing to do," Adam replied simply. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Dixon, approached then, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering guilt. "Miss Turner," he said, removing his hat, "I can't express how sorry I am for what happened. The count was wrong, and by the time we realized you were missing, the storm was closing in fast. I never should have sent just one man back." "But you did send someone," Katherine said, glancing at Adam, "and he found me. That's what matters now." The reunion continued as more members of the wagon train came to welcome them back and hear the tale of their journey. Katherine watched as Adam recounted their experiences, downplaying his own courage and resourcefulness, while emphasizing how fortunate they had been to find shelter when they needed it most. Later, as the excitement died down and people returned to their wagons and tents, Martha insisted that Katherine stay with her family in their wagon. "The children have been so worried about you," she said. "It would do them good to have you close tonight." Katherine agreed, though she found herself reluctant to part from Adam. As Martha took the children to prepare space in the wagon, Katherine turned to him. "Where will you stay?" she asked. "Dixon's arranged a room for me at the boarding house in town," Adam replied. "I'll check on the horses, then head there." An awkward silence fell between them. After days of constant companionship, the prospect of separation, even temporarily, felt strange and unwelcome. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Katherine asked finally. Adam's expression softened. "Of course. We have much to discuss about the future." The promise in those words carried her through the night, even as she lay awake in Martha's crowded wagon, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the camp, yet feeling oddly out of place. Her mind kept returning to Adam, the warmth of his smile, the strength of his arms around her waist as they rode, the tenderness in his eyes when he had asked to kiss her. Morning brought a flurry of activity as the camp prepared for another day of waiting out the winter in Santa Fe. Katherine helped Martha with breakfast, answering the children's endless questions about her adventure with as much patience as she could muster, all the while watching for Adam's return. He arrived mid-morning, looking refreshed after a night in a proper bed. The sight of him striding confidently through the camp, nodding greetings to those he passed, made Katherine's heart quicken in a way that confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Her feelings for Adam Xavier went far beyond gratitude or circumstantial attachment. Martha noticed her reaction and raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Katherine excused herself to meet Adam. "Good morning," he said, his smile warming his entire face. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Katherine replied, suddenly shy in the daylight, surrounded by the curious eyes of the camp. Would you walk with me? I'd like to see more of Santa Fe." Adam offered his arm, which she took gladly. As they walked away from the camp toward the town proper, Katherine felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "Your cousin seems glad to have you back," Adam observed. "She is. The children, too. They've been through so much already on this journey." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "And you? Are you glad to be back with the wagon train?" Katherine considered the question carefully. "I'm glad to see my family safe, of course, but I'm finding that I don't quite fit anymore." "Does that make sense?" "More than you might think," Adam replied. "Shared hardship changes people, creates bonds that others can't fully understand." They had reached the edge of the plaza now, where vendors were setting up stalls selling everything from hand-woven blankets to fresh bread. Adam guided her to a quiet corner where a stone bench offered a view of the bustling square. "Katherine," he said as they sat down, his voice serious, "I need to know what you want to happen now. The wagon train won't leave until spring. I'm contracted to guide them all the way to Oregon, which means I'll be staying in Santa Fe until then." "And after?" Katherine asked, her heart in her throat. "After you reach Oregon, what then?" Adam took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "That depends largely on you. Before I met you, I had no plans beyond delivering the train safely to its destination. Now—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Now I find myself wanting something I haven't wanted in a very long time. A home, a future, a life that includes more than endless trails and temporary camps." Hope bloomed in Katherine's chest. "A life that includes me." "If you'll have me," Adam said simply. "I know it's fast, perhaps too fast by conventional standards, but I think we've seen each other's true character more clearly in these past days than most couples do in years of courtship." Katherine knew he was right. The dangers they had faced together had stripped away pretense, revealing the essential nature of who they were. She had seen Adam's courage, his integrity, his capacity for kindness even in the harshest circumstances. And he had seen her not the proper schoolteacher from St. Louis, but the woman beneath those social constraints with her own strength and determination. "I need time," she said finally. "Not because I doubt my feelings for you, but because this is a decision that will shape the rest of my life. I want to be certain that what we feel now will endure beyond the extraordinary circumstances that brought us together." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time is something we have plenty of, at least until spring. Will you allow me to court you properly while we're here in Santa Fe? To see if what we've begun can grow into something lasting." "I'd like that very much," Katherine replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Though I'm not sure anything about our relationship could be considered proper at this point." Adam laughed, the sound rich and warm in the crisp winter air. "Then we'll write our own rules, Katherine Turner, together." The weeks that followed were unlike any courtship Katherine had ever imagined for herself. Santa Fe in winter proved to be a vibrant, multicultural community with its own rhythms and traditions. Adam, who had visited the settlement several times before, took pleasure in showing her its hidden treasures: the oldest church in the territory, the bustling market where traders from across the frontier gathered to buy and sell goods, the small cantinas where locals gathered to share music and stories. They spent their days exploring the town and its surroundings, sometimes accompanied by Martha's children, who had quickly become devoted to Adam, particularly after he taught them to track animals in the snow and to identify different bird calls. In the evenings, they often joined the communal meals at the Wagon camp, or sometimes ventured into town to dine at one of the small taverns that served a blend of Mexican and American fare. Through it all, their connection deepened and evolved. What had begun as mutual respect forged in crisis grew into genuine affection, and then into something more profound: a love built on shared values and complementary strengths, rather than mere passion or convenience. Katherine learned that beneath Adam's stoic exterior lay a man of deep feeling and quiet intelligence, one who read voraciously when opportunity allowed, and who had a gift for languages, speaking passable Spanish and even some of the native dialects. In turn, Adam discovered Katherine's quick wit and adventurous spirit, qualities that had been stifled by the constraints of her previous life, but now flourished in the freedom of the frontier. As Christmas approached, the Wagon train community prepared to celebrate despite being far from their original homes. A small pine tree was erected in the center of the camp, decorated with handmade ornaments contributed by each family. Plans were made for a feast, with everyone contributing what they could to the communal table. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside, the settlers gathered in a large tent that had been set up for the occasion. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled company as they shared songs and stories from their various traditions. The children performed a simple nativity play, with Martha's youngest son cast as a particularly enthusiastic sheep. Katherine sat beside Adam, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the festivities. In the weeks since their arrival in Santa Fe, they had become an acknowledged couple within the Wagon train community, their unusual beginning giving way to what everyone now saw as a natural and fitting match. "I have something for you," Adam whispered as the play concluded and people began to mill about, helping themselves to mulled cider and sweet treats from the refreshment table. He led her to a quiet corner of the tent, then reached into his pocket and produced a small, carefully wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Catherine," he said, his eyes reflecting the lantern light as he handed it to her. Catherine untied the simple string and unfolded the brown paper to reveal a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a compass rose, hanging from a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it to examine the intricate engraving. "I had it made by a silversmith in town," Adam explained, "to remind you that no matter where life takes us, we found our true direction when we found each other." Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes as the full meaning of his gift sank in. "Help me put it on," she asked, handing him the necklace and turning so he could fasten it around her neck. His fingers were gentle as they brushed the skin at her nape, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. When she turned back to face him, his expression was tender and hopeful. "I have something for you too," Catherine said. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "It's not as beautiful as your gift, but—" Adam opened the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm, a polished stone of deep blue, shot through with veins of gold, attached to a leather cord. "Lapis lazuli," Catherine explained. "The merchant said it's a stone of truth and friendship. I thought it matched your eyes." Adam closed his fingers around the stone, his expression solemn. "Thank you. I'll treasure it always." Around them, the celebration continued. But in that moment, they existed in a world of their own, a world built on shared experiences and growing love. A world that seemed to hold infinite promise, despite the uncertainties that still lay ahead. As winter gradually released its grip on the land, preparations began for the wagon train's departure. The mountain passes would soon be clear enough for travel, and the settlers were eager to reach Oregon before the next winter set in. Maps were studied, supplies replenished, wagons repaired and reinforced for the challenging terrain that lay ahead. For Catherine and Adam, the approaching departure brought decisions that could no longer be postponed. One evening in early March, as they walked along the banks of the Santa Fe River, now flowing freely after the spring thaw, Adam raised the subject they had both been avoiding. "Dixon expects to leave within the fortnight," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "The scouts report that the northern pass should be clear by then." Catherine nodded, watching the water rush over smooth stones. "Martha's been packing for days. The children are excited to be moving again." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Adam stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Catherine," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these months in Santa Fe have been the happiest of my life. Being with you has shown me possibilities I thought were closed to me forever. But I need to know, what do you want for your future? Do you still intend to continue to Oregon with your cousin's family?" It was the question Catherine had been asking herself with increasing urgency as the departure date approached. Martha and her husband had made it clear that they still welcomed her company and help with the children. The homestead they planned to establish in Oregon's Willamette Valley had always been described as having a place for her. Yet the prospect of continuing the journey no longer filled her with the sense of purpose and excitement it once had. Santa Fe, with its blend of cultures and its vibrant community, had captured her heart in unexpected ways. And more significantly, her future had become inextricably linked with Adam's in her mind, a future she couldn't fully envision without knowing his own plans and desires. "What about you?" she countered gently. "You're contracted to guide the train all the way to Oregon. Will you fulfill that obligation?" Adam's expression grew thoughtful. "Dixon would understand if I chose to remain here. There are other scouts who could take my place for the final leg of the journey." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "But I need to know what you want, Catherine. Where you see your place being." Catherine took a deep breath, finding courage in the steady warmth of his gaze. I've been thinking about this for weeks now. About Oregon, about Santa Fe, about us." She squeezed his hands. "I realized that I don't need to go to Oregon to find what I was looking for when I left St. Louis. I've already found it." Hope kindled in Adam's eyes. "And what is that?" "A sense of belonging, purpose, the chance to build something meaningful." Katherine smiled up at him. "I've found all of that here, Adam. With you." The tension visibly eased from Adam's shoulders. "Does that mean you're considering staying in Santa Fe?" "I am," Katherine confirmed. "The schoolmaster mentioned that they're seeking another teacher for the growing number of American children in the settlement. It would be work I love, in a place that feels right." Adam nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Then, to Katherine's surprise, he released her hands and took a step back. "Wait here," he said, an unfamiliar nervousness in his voice. "There's something I need to show you." Before she could question him, he strode quickly back toward town. Katherine waited by the riverside, puzzled by his sudden departure but trusting that all would soon be explained. When Adam returned less than 15 minutes later, he was carrying a rolled document tied with red ribbon. "I wasn't sure when the right moment would come," he said, slightly out of breath from his hurried errand. "But it seems that moment is now." He untied the ribbon and carefully unrolled the document, revealing what appeared to be a land deed. "3 weeks ago, I purchased a parcel of land just outside town," Adam explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. 10 acres with good water access and a small adobe house that needs some work, but is sound at its core. There's room for a garden, space for horses, and a view of the mountains that takes your breath away at sunset. Katherine stared at him in amazement. "You bought land, but I assumed you preferred the freedom of the trail." "I did once," Adam admitted. "Or perhaps I merely told myself that because I saw no alternative that appealed to me. But these months in Santa Fe with you have shown me that there are different kinds of freedom, including the freedom to choose routes over wandering, to build something lasting instead of always moving on." He carefully rolled the deed again and secured it with the ribbon before continuing. "I bought the land as an act of faith, Katherine. Faith in possibilities I hadn't dared to consider before meeting you. Whether you chose to stay in Santa Fe or continue to Oregon, I knew that I was ready to stop running from the past and start building a future." The significance of his actions wasn't lost on Katherine. For a man who had spent years avoiding attachment to any place or person, purchasing land represented more than a practical decision. It was a profound shift in how he saw himself and his place in the world. "Will you show me?" she asked softly. "This land of yours?" Adam's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd ask. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. It's about an hour's ride from town." Katherine nodded, her heart full. Tomorrow would be perfect. The next day dawned clear and mild, a perfect early spring morning. Adam arrived at the Wagon camp shortly after breakfast, leading both their horses, saddled and ready for the day's excursion. Martha, who had grown increasingly supportive of their relationship as she observed the positive changes in her cousin, waved them off with a knowing smile. "Don't rush back on our account," she called as they mounted. "We've plenty to keep us busy here." The ride out of Santa Fe took them northwest, following a well-trodden trail that wound through rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines and juniper. As they rode, Adam pointed out landmarks and shared what he knew of the area's history, the ancient Pueblo ruins that predated European settlement by centuries, the Spanish colonial influences that shaped the region's architecture and culture, and the more recent American presence that was gradually transforming the territory. An hour from town, they crested a gentle hill and Adam reined his horse to a stop. "There," he said, gesturing toward the valley below. "That's the property." Katherine followed his gaze and caught her breath. The land spread out before them in a natural bowl, sheltered by hills on three sides but open to the south, where distant mountains rose majestically against the clear blue sky. A small stream cut through the western edge of the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees just beginning to show the first green buds of spring. Near the center of the valley stood a modest adobe house with a wooden porch wrapped around two sides. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small barn and corral sat nearby. The buildings showed signs of neglect, peeling paint on the woodwork, missing roof tiles here and there, but the basic structures appeared solid and well-proportioned. "It's beautiful," Katherine said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. The previous owner was a widower who returned east to live with his daughter when his health began to fail, Adam explained as they rode down the slope toward the house. "It's been empty for about a year, so there's work to be done, but nothing that can't be fixed with time and effort." As they approached, Katherine could see more details: the wooden shutters flanking the windows, the remnants of what had once been a kitchen garden now overgrown with weeds, a well with a stone surround near the back of the house. They dismounted in the yard, tying their horses to a hitching post that tilted slightly but held firm. Adam led Katherine onto the porch, producing a key from his pocket to unlock the heavy wooden door. "It's not much to look at yet," he cautioned as they stepped inside. "But I've been coming out when I can to make some basic repairs." The interior was simple but spacious, with thick adobe walls that would keep the house cool in summer and warm in winter. The main room had a large stone fireplace along one wall and windows that let in streams of sunlight. A doorway led to a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, while a short hallway connected to two smaller rooms that could serve as bedrooms. Evidence of Adam's work was visible throughout: new glass in windows that had been broken, patches in the plaster walls, a partially repaired roof that had allowed in a few water stains on the ceiling beams. "You've been busy," Katherine observed, trailing her fingers along a smooth wooden shelf that had clearly been recently installed. "It gives me something constructive to do with my hands," Adam replied, "and each repair makes it feel more like a home." Katherine suggested when he hesitated. Adam nodded, watching her closely as she moved through the space. "Could you see it as one?" he asked quietly. "A home, I mean." The question hung in the air between them, its significance extending far beyond the immediate context. Katherine took her time before answering, moving to the window to look out at the land that stretched toward the distant mountains. "Yes," she said finally, turning back to face him. "I could see it becoming a wonderful home, with work and care and love." Something shifted in Adam's expression, a certainty replacing what had been cautious hope. He crossed the room to stand before her, then, to Katherine's surprise, lowered himself to one knee. "Katherine Turner," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I came back for you in that snowstorm because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving anyone to such a fate. I stayed with you in the days that followed because duty and honor demanded it. But I stand before you now, or rather, kneel, because I've come to love you with a depth that I never imagined possible." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring with a modest but beautiful sapphire set in its center. "I ask you now, not out of duty or circumstance, but out of love and choice. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here or wherever else our journey might lead us?" Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. In that moment, all the doubts and questions that had lingered at the edges of her mind fell away, leaving only the certainty that this man, this brave, honorable, compassionate man, was the one with whom she wanted to share her future. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and confident despite her tears. Yes, Adam Xavier, I will marry you. Here, in this house that will become our home, in this land that will become our legacy. Adam rose to his feet, slipping the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then he drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and new ones just beginning. As they stood together in the sunlit room that would soon be theirs, Katherine thought about the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. The decision to leave St. Louis, the harrowing separation from the wagon train, the days of struggle and survival that had forged a bond stronger than any conventional courtship could have created. I never imagined, when I joined the wagon train, that I would find my future in a place we were only meant to pass through, she murmured against Adam's chest. He stroked her hair gently. Life rarely follows the trails we think we're meant to travel. Sometimes we have to get lost to find where we truly belong. Katherine smiled, thinking of how apt that sentiment was for both of them. When should we tell the others? About our decision to stay, about our engagement, tonight at dinner, Adam suggested. Your cousin should be the first to know, I think. Katherine nodded agreement. Martha will be disappointed that I'm not continuing to Oregon, but I think she's suspected for some time that my plans were changing. They spent the remainder of the day exploring the property, with Adam pointing out his ideas for improvements, and Katherine offering suggestions of her own. By the time they rode back toward Santa Fe in the late afternoon, the future had begun to take shape in both their minds, a future rooted in the land they had just visited, but expansive enough to accommodate dreams they were only beginning to articulate. That evening, as they shared their news with Martha and the rest of the wagon train community, they were met with a mixture of surprise, congratulations, and genuine well wishes. Dixon, the wagon master, was perhaps the most enthusiastic in his approval. Always thought you two would make a good match, he declared, clapping Adam on the shoulder. Even before this whole getting left behind business, something about the way you watched out for her from the start of the journey. Adam raised an eyebrow at this assessment. Was I that obvious? To everyone but the lady herself, I reckon, Dixon chuckled. Katherine felt herself blushing but couldn't deny the wagon master's insight. Looking back, she could recall moments during the early part of their journey when Adam had indeed shown her special consideration, bringing fresh water to her family's wagon during a particularly dry stretch, helping her down from difficult terrain when the trail grew rough, lingering near her campfire in the evenings just long enough to ensure she and her cousin's family were comfortable before moving on to his solitary post. Had he been drawn to her even then, before circumstance had thrown them together in crisis? The thought was both flattering and humbling. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. While the wagon train made its final preparations for departure, Katherine and Adam focused on their own plans for remaining in Santa Fe. Adam formally notified Dixon of his decision not to continue as scout, recommending a capable replacement who was quickly hired. Katherine visited the schoolmaster and was offered a position teaching the younger children starting in the autumn term. Most importantly, arrangements were made for their wedding, which they decided should take place before the wagon train's departure. A small adobe church near the plaza would host the ceremony, with the entire wagon train community invited to attend, along with the few local acquaintances they had made during their stay. Martha insisted on helping Katherine prepare, offering the use of her own wedding dress, which had been carefully packed in one of the family's trunks. With some alterations by a skilled seamstress in town, the simple white gown was transformed to fit Katherine's slender frame. On the morning of their wedding day, as Martha helped her cousin dress in the family's wagon, she grew uncharacteristically sentimental. "I'm going to miss you terribly," she admitted, securing the last button on the back of Catherine's dress. "When I invited you to join us, I never imagined we'd be parting ways before reaching Oregon." "I know," Katherine said, turning to embrace her cousin. "I never imagined it either, but life has a way of changing our plans when we least expect it." Martha stepped back, wiping away a tear. "Adam is a good man. Anyone who would ride back into a blizzard to save someone left behind. Well, that's the kind of man a woman can trust with her life." "And her heart," Katherine added softly. "And her heart," Martha agreed with a watery smile. "Now, let's get that veil in place. We can't keep your groom waiting." The church was filled with sunlight and the scent of early spring flowers when Katherine entered on the arm of Martha's husband, who had offered to stand in for her absent father. Adam waited at the altar, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was the expression in his eyes as he watched her approach that Katherine would remember most clearly in the years to come, a look of such profound love and wonder that it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony itself was simple and brief, conducted by the local priest in a mixture of Spanish and English that reflected the blended culture of their new home. When Adam slipped the gold band onto her finger to join the engagement ring he had given her, his hands were steady and sure, the hands of a man certain of his choice and his future. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the priest declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Adam leaned down to seal their union with a kiss, Katherine felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the uncertainty and hardship that had led them to this moment. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, had survived dangers that might have broken lesser spirits, and had emerged with a bond that she knew, with bone-deep certainty, would withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. The celebration that followed was joyful and boisterous, with music provided by local musicians and a feast that combined American and Mexican traditions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plaza where the festivities had spilled out from the small church courtyard, Adam drew Katherine aside for a quiet moment alone. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the dancers twirling to the lively music. "More than I knew was possible," she replied honestly, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "I have everything I never knew I wanted," Adam said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A home, a future, and a wife who is as brave as she is beautiful." Katherine smiled up at him. "Not bad for a man who once claimed to prefer the solitude of the trail." "The trail led me to you," Adam replied simply. "That makes all the difference." 2 days later, they stood with the rest of the settlement to wave goodbye as the wagon train finally departed, continuing its journey toward Oregon. There were tears, especially as Katherine embraced Martha and her children one last time, but also promises to write and perhaps even visit, once both families were properly settled. As the last wagon disappeared around the bend in the trail, Adam took Katherine's hand, their matching gold bands catching the morning sunlight. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked. Katherine smiled, savoring the sound of her new name. "Yes, Mr. Xavier, I believe I am." They rode side by side toward their property, no longer simply a piece of land with potential, but the foundation for the life they would build together. The adobe house awaited them, already beginning to reflect their joint efforts at restoration. Adam had repaired the roof completely and replaced the broken windows, while Katherine had scrubbed the interior clean and planted the beginnings of a kitchen garden behind the house. It was still rough around the edges, still requiring months of work to transform it into the home they envisioned. But as they dismounted in the yard that was now truly theirs, Katherine felt only excitement for the journey ahead. "I have something to show you," Adam said, helping her down from her horse. "A wedding gift of sorts. It wasn't quite ready before the ceremony." Curious, Katherine followed him into the house. He led her to the main room, where a new addition stood against the wall opposite the fireplace, a beautiful upright piano, its wood gleaming in the light that streamed through the windows. Katherine gasped, moving forward to touch the polished surface with reverent fingers. "Adam, how did you?" "It came all the way from St. Louis on the last supply wagon," he explained, clearly delighted by her reaction. "Martha mentioned that you played, that you'd had to leave your family's piano behind when you joined the wagon train. I thought our home should have music in it." Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes as she lifted the keyboard cover and ran her fingers lightly over the ivory keys. "It's wonderful, the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me." Adam stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Will you play something?" "Christen our home with music." Katherine nodded, sitting on the bench and adjusting her skirts. After a moment's consideration, she began to play not a classical piece or a church hymn as she might once have chosen, but a simple folk tune that she had heard the local musicians playing at their wedding celebration. The melody filled the room, breathing life into spaces that had stood empty for too long. As the last notes faded, Adam sat beside her on the bench, his expression solemn despite the joy that had filled their day. "I made a promise to you when I found you in that snowstorm," he said quietly. "I said I wouldn't leave you again. I want you to know that I meant it then, and I mean it even more now. Whatever comes, Katherine, we face it together." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling the strength and warmth of him, the steadiness that had drawn her from the beginning. "Together," she agreed. "That's how we found our way here, and that's how we'll build our future." Outside their window, the New Mexico sun cast long shadows across the land that would sustain them in the years to come. Inside, the bonds they had forged in crisis, and tempered with love, created a different kind of shelter, one that would endure long after the adobe walls around them had crumbled to dust. In that moment, Katherine understood with perfect clarity that sometimes being left behind wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the first step on a path that led not away from something, but toward exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their choice to remain in Santa Fe. The territory was changing rapidly as more settlers arrived from the east, bringing with them new ideas, technologies, and ambitions. Adam and Katherine's homestead evolved alongside the growing community, becoming not just a home but a center of hospitality and learning for the area. The adobe house expanded gradually to accommodate their needs, first with a larger kitchen and dining room where Katherine could indulge her growing interest in combining traditional New Mexican cuisine with the recipes she had brought from the East. Then with additional bedrooms as their family began to grow. Their first child, a son they named William after Adam's father, arrived almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. Katherine had worried about facing childbirth so far from the medical facilities of larger cities, but the local midwife, a skilled Hispanic woman named Senora Ortiz, guided her through the experience with confidence and care. Adam had paced anxiously outside their bedroom during the long hours of labor, but when Senora Ortiz finally invited him in to meet his son, the expression of wonder on his face had made all Katherine's pain worthwhile. "He's perfect," Adam had whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with a tenderness that brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "Perfect, just like his mother." 2 years later, their daughter Elizabeth joined the family, followed by another son, James, the year after that. With each addition, Their life grew richer and more deeply rooted in the land they had chosen. The school where Katherine taught flourished as well, expanding from a single room to a proper building with multiple classrooms as Santa Fe's population increased. Though she took time away after each child's birth, Katherine always returned to teaching, finding that her work there complemented rather than competed with her role as a mother and wife. Adam, meanwhile, had discovered unexpected talents as a rancher and businessman. The 10 acres they had started with grew to 30, then 50 as neighboring properties became available. He raised horses primarily, developing a breeding program that became known throughout the territory for producing animals that combined the stamina of Western stock with the refined characteristics of Eastern breeds. His knowledge of the region and its trails also made him a valuable consultant for the railroad companies that were gradually extending their lines into the territory, and for the territorial government as it worked to improve transportation and communication networks. Life was not without its challenges, of course. The harsh environment of the New Mexico territory tested their resilience. Regularly droughts that threatened their water supply, severe winters that isolated them for weeks at a time, occasional tensions between the territory's diverse cultural groups that required careful navigation. During a particularly difficult period when a prolonged drought coincided with an economic downturn that affected Adam's horse business, Katherine found him standing on the porch late one night, staring out at the stars with a troubled expression. "You ever regret it?" she asked, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as she joined him. "Staying here instead of continuing on the trail?" Adam turned to her, surprise evident in his face even in the dim starlight. "Never," he said firmly, "not for a single moment." He drew her into his arms, both of them finding comfort in the familiar embrace that had sustained them through every trial. "The challenges we face here are just that, challenges to be overcome, not reasons for regret. This land, this life we've built. It's everything I never knew I wanted until I found you. Even when the well runs low and the bank account follows suit," Katherine teased gently. Adam's laugh rumbled through his chest beneath her cheek. "Even then, especially then, because facing those challenges with you makes them bearable." As their children grew, Adam and Katherine took care to teach them not just practical skills for frontier life, but also the values that had guided their own journey: courage, resilience, compassion, and an appreciation for the diverse cultures that made up their community. They maintained contact with Martha's family in Oregon through regular letters, sharing news of their growing families and the developments in their respective settlements. In the summer of 1875, 7 years after the wagon train had continued without them, they undertook the journey north to visit, traveling by a combination of stagecoach and the newly extended railroad lines. The reunion was joyful, with cousins meeting for the first time and the adults marveling at how much had changed since their parting. Martha's husband had established a successful lumber business in the lush forests near Portland, and their children had grown into confident young people who moved easily between the wilderness and the rapidly developing town. "You were right to stay in Santa Fe," Martha admitted one evening as she and Katherine sat on the porch of the family's comfortable farmhouse, watching their children play in the twilight. "I can see now that it was where you were meant to be, with the man you were meant to find." Katherine smiled, thinking of the strange twist of fate that had separated her from the wagon train in that snowstorm. "Sometimes the wrong path leads to the right destination," she said simply. When they returned to Santa Fe after their month-long visit, the familiar sight of their adobe homestead against the backdrop of the mountains brought a sense of rightness that confirmed Martha's words. This was indeed where she and Adam belonged, not because fate had stranded her in a blizzard, but because they had chosen to build their life here, day by day, challenge by challenge, joy by joy. As the years passed and their children grew toward adulthood, Katherine often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The young school teacher who had left St. Louis seeking a new beginning could never have imagined the life that awaited her, not just in its physical setting, but in the depth of love and purpose she had found. William, their eldest, showed a natural affinity for ranching and business, working alongside his father with an easy competence that made Adam's chest swell with pride. Elizabeth inherited her mother's love of learning and teaching, often assisting in Katherine's classroom and declaring her intention to become a teacher herself. James, the youngest, displayed a talent for medicine that led him eventually to study with the local doctor, combining traditional Western medical knowledge with the herbal remedies he learned from Senora Ortiz and other local healers. On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, Adam surprised Katherine by taking her back to the small church where they had exchanged their vows. The building had been expanded and renovated over the years, but the simple altar where they had stood remained unchanged. 20 years, Adam mused, standing with her in the empty church, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows that had been added since their wedding day. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in that snowstorm. Other times, it seems like another lifetime entirely. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, noting the silver that now threaded his dark hair, the lines of experience that framed his eyes but did nothing to diminish the warmth of his gaze when he looked at her. "Would you do it again?" she asked. "Ride back into a blizzard for a woman you barely knew?" Adam smiled, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her palm. "For you, without hesitation, though I'd prefer not to test that particular claim at our age." Katherine laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet church. "No need. You've proven your point quite thoroughly over the years, Mr. Xavier." That evening, they hosted a celebration at their homestead, inviting friends and neighbors to commemorate not just their anniversary but the life they had built in the community. Their home, once a neglected adobe structure in a remote valley, had become a gathering place where people of all backgrounds came together: Hispanic families who had lived in the territory for generations, Anglo settlers who had arrived more recently, and representatives from the native tribes with whom Adam had established respectful trading relationships over the years. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Katherine found herself sitting on the porch with Adam, watching their grown children mingle with the guests. William was deep in conversation with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, his expression betraying an interest that went beyond mere friendship. Elizabeth danced with several young men in turn, her laugh carrying across the yard. James had gathered a small audience to whom he was explaining some new medical technique with animated gestures. "We did well, didn't we?" Adam said softly, following her gaze. "Not just with the ranch or the house, but with them. They're good people." "The best of both of us," Katherine agreed. "Plus something uniquely their own." Adam took her hand, his thumb tracing the worn gold band that had not left her finger in 20 years. "I used to think that happiness was something that happened to other people who hadn't seen the things I'd seen during the war, who hadn't lost what I'd lost. Meeting you, building this life together. It taught me that joy isn't something you find, but something you create, day by day." Katherine turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same steadfast love that had sustained her through every challenge and triumph of their shared life. "You came back for me in that snowstorm," she said softly. "But in every way that matters. We've been finding our way back to each other ever since, through droughts and difficult harvests. through childbirth and childhood illnesses, through all the ordinary days that add up to an extraordinary life. Adam leaned forward to kiss her, a gesture as familiar as breathing yet still capable of quickening her heart after all these years. "And we'll keep finding our way back," he promised against her lips, "for as many days as we're given." From the yard came the sound of music starting up a violin, a guitar, the clear notes of a flute. Their guests began to form sets for dancing, calls going out for the hosts to join them. Adam stood and offered Katherine his hand, his blue eyes twinkling with the same light that had first captured her attention all those years ago. "Shall we, Mrs. Xavier? I believe they're playing our song." Katherine took his hand and rose, moving with him toward the music and laughter, toward the life they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings, a life that had started with a promise made in a snowstorm and fulfilled through thousands of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. A life that proved, beyond any doubt, that sometimes being left behind was the first step toward finding exactly where you belonged.